Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 237. Inclusivity. But how? I don't know any organisations right now not touting inclusivity as part of their culture. But the reality I witness is often very different. And that's the difference between espoused and actual culture. Espoused culture refers to the values, norms and behaviours that an organisation claims to uphold. It's what we see on posters and screensavers, on their websites, and what's talked about at interviews and induction events. The actual culture, however, is how people really behave when going about their day-to-day work. These are the lived norms of behaviour, and if that behaviour doesn't align with what's shown publicly, we lose trust and the psychological contract is broken. Now, we're all human, and our behaviour isn't always perfect. We have bad days, and when stressed, we can act in ways that we're not proud of. The real test comes with what we do about the inconsistency or incongruence. If we bury our head in the sand like ostriches are reported to do, we negatively impact the engagement and the commitment of our people. Ironically, and for the sake of accuracy, ostriches are actually dropping their heads into their ground-based nests to rotate the eggs so that they can thrive. There's a lesson in there for leaders and managers which I'll expand on later. So in this episode, I'll be unpacking what it means to be an inclusive leader in day-to-day reality, but as you'd expect, through an introvert lens. And many of the principles that I'll outline here apply generally to inclusivity that also benefits the neurodivergent. And fortunately, most organisations are good at that bit. Let's start with reminding ourselves of the benefits of creating and perpetuating an inclusive culture. Most organisations, understandably, are more interested in the tangible benefits, as they're always interested in the return on investment. So here's a reminder of those tangible benefits, which predictably include enhanced productivity, improved retention, enriched talent pool, more reliable problem solving, greater creativity, stronger client relationships, reduced legal risk. Then we get to the intangibles, which are obviously less easy to measure, but often have a way bigger impact. They include a culture of belonging, which is the foundation of psychological safety, improved well-being, and that's going to mean different things to different people, stimulating collaboration, so rather than being excluded, all voices are heard and valued, growth mindset, people are enthusiastic about learning and continuous improvement. And finally on my list, stronger team dynamics. So difference is valued at an embodied level as strengths are played to. As you might imagine, these intangibles are symbiotic and create leveraged impact. When you list things like that, and there's possibly nothing you hadn't heard of before, it presents such a compelling reason. And it's madness that managers and leaders don't treat inclusivity as more than a tick box exercise. So given that we're all honestly pretty familiar, why is it so difficult to create and maintain an inclusive environment? The answer is bias, and more specifically, unconscious bias. This has been known about for decades, and forward-thinking organisations put in place unconscious bias training. Now, this was done with the best of intentions, but rather than embedding the behaviour change that was needed, these bite-sized seminars and maybe training interventions did little more than raise awareness. Surprise, surprise. And now, the received wisdom is that unconscious bias training doesn't work. But it was a start. Behaviour change can take a fair time to become someone's new norm because it's often about changing habits. And new habits can take anything from 18 to 254 days to embed, depending on the complexity. And changing unconscious bias is incredibly complex. That's because our brains like taking the path of least resistance, the path most travelled. It's a shortcut that our brain uses because it's designed for efficiency. Creating and using a new neural pathway takes time and intentional application. So rather than throw our hands in the air and give up, what can we do? In part, it's about designing business processes around the desired behaviours. What do I mean? Well, let me be specific about some of the opportunities for behaviour and process change that I see. Number one, when it comes to interviewing potential new joiners, send them the questions in advance, so introverts and other thinking types can prepare and give of their best in the short time that they are in front of you. As long as you continue to judge people on their ability to answer spontaneously, you're more likely to be screening out those who need time to think through their answers. Secondly, there's the plethora of back-to-back meetings that too many organisations have as their working norm. And I have several questions about this. I'll start with, when do people get to do the work that the meeting initiates? Most meetings end with agreed actions after all. Oh, I know. People surreptitiously work in the next meeting or in the evenings when they're supposed to be with family or taking downtime. Not acceptable. My other question at this stage is, when do people get the opportunity to finalise their notes from the first meeting and prepare for the next? Oh, that's right, they don't. And then people wonder why meetings aren't effective. Third on my list of behaviour and process changes that would make a difference is that if you're planning to conduct a promotion panel or regular performance review, come to that, make sure you take into consideration all aspects of the person and their performance. This shouldn't be about whether they fit your opinion of the ideal. I just last week saw an example of someone who was told that they were not being promoted because they were not outgoing enough. In certain roles, I can see how this would be a problem, but that's certainly not all roles. And then I hear many managers complaining about their team members being distracted, chatting too much and unable to focus. All I'll say is, be careful what you ask for. Fourth on my list of behaviours and processes is that if you're involving people in problem solving, take into account the different ways that people engage in problem solving. Not everyone contributes their best ideas spontaneously, so use a variety of problem-solving techniques if you want a robust solution that addresses the root cause rather than just providing a temporary sticking plaster for the problem. Many individuals, not just introverts, need to examine the data and do their research before offering up their ideas. And can we cut this current obsession with innovation? That's only one form of creativity. Sometimes we simply need to adapt something, so be clear about what's really needed so that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater just because you're looking for novelty. So this brings me to my fifth and final point. Thinking is work. We are so focused on presenteeism and ridiculous measurements of activity that we lose sight of valuable contribution and the resulting productivity. What do organisations who've taken to monitoring mouse movements hope to achieve? If I'm thinking, I'm highly unlikely to be moving my mouse and clicking, but sitting, thinking, is considered shirking or swinging the lead. Give me a break. If you want your organisation or team to move on in any substantive way, Give people thinking time. So these are just some of the things that you can do as a leader to start the behaviour changes needed to create a more inclusive business culture where people feel like they belong. Remember, people do notice what you do as a leader, which means they also notice when your words and actions don't match. This is what contributes to the breaking of the psychological contract. And it's still true that people join an organisation because of what it says it stands for, and they leave because managers don't hold good on those promises. So just as when the ostrich drops its head into the nest to ensure that their eggs are the right temperature so they can thrive, drop your attention towards your people regularly. And when you do, don't just ask the cursory, "You okay?" We all know what that elicits. It's a, "Yep, I'm fine." And what the dickens does that mean anyway? It's our polite way of saying, "Leave me alone," combined with, "It's not as though you really care anyway." Ask more meaningful questions like, what has gone well so far today? What is frustrating you the most right now? And if I could do one thing to improve the way we all work together, what would that be? Sure, your people might be a bit surprised at first, but this is what checking on your eggs, or as a manager or leader checking on your people, really entails. It's not about mouse clicks or presenteeism. So if your organisation is one of those pushing for more time back in the office, at least do people the courtesy of making the culture inclusive so that when they're there, they feel they belong. Show them that you care. Don't just assume that they're okay because they've not told you otherwise. The reality is we create an inclusive culture one behaviour at a time, and all of us can be part of making that a reality. Don't stand back and wait for others. Make the first move. Remember, introverts are powerful leaders too, and in my experience, we have more impact by doing than by talking about what we're going to do. Because beyond our considered words and beyond our intentional actions, as Maya Angelou said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So as you head back to your team, I implore you to take the time to know what makes your people feel like they belong, and then do more of that. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.